Welcome to the Dystopian Renaissance. We cover spirituality, healing, consciousness, and truth. In this chaotic world we live in, it's important to get out of the matrix, and we'll do just that with biohacking, nutrition, spiritual awakenings, alternative healing, and freedom. This is the Dystopian Renaissance, and this is your host, Johnny Sage.
I'm sitting with Sophia Fogt today. She's a trauma survivor, a podcast host, and an alternative healer. Sophia, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Excited to have you on because your story is definitely an inspirational one. I've listened to your podcast and I know we've talked before. How did all this begin? Was it a spiritual awakening or did you just start your healing journey for some other reason?
So I've always been a pretty spiritual person. I grew up in religion and in a pretty high demand religion. And so God, healing, that always had kind of been part of my life and my story. But it wasn't till I would say probably 4 years ago, where I kind of had a deconstruction of sorts, where I realized maybe some of the I guess I can describe it best this way. I had built a sandcastle of my spirituality, my religion, everything was kind of involved in some parts of that sandcastle. It's if you've ever been on the beach, you're like, oh, there's seaweed, there's trash on the beach, there's whatever. And I had built this, what had been my spirituality, and it had a lot of things that didn't serve me within it. And so I kind of went through a process of reconstructing, letting certain things go, kind of reclaiming my own sovereignty and my own connection with God and kind of redefining what that looked like. I realized I had a lot of fear-based belief. I had a lot of just kind of scarcity sort of beliefs. If I focused really a lot in black and white and doing everything right and checking those boxes, but it was very much based in check the boxes to kind of hustle my way to feeling worthy or feeling like I was enough. And so when I had this sort of shift happen, it transformed everything. It transformed my relationship with my religion and opened my heart, cracked my heart open. It transformed my relationship with God and spirituality. It transformed my ability to heal and really set me in a new trajectory that kind of allowed me to feel more wholeness and more just further down that line of healing.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining. And yes, I have been to the beach, so that that did resonate with me.
Not always gorgeous white sand,
Bad jokes aside, my apologies. Yeah, that's interesting how you had a religious background. Mm-hmm. And now that you've grown more spiritual, a lot of people had to heal their religious trauma. Were you able to segue more smoothly, or because some people have a resentment towards that religion they had earlier?
I have to say there is some cognitive dissonance there because I think separating between, I grew up saying, hearing anything that I would hear and just thinking, it's amen to everything, realizing that if something didn't set perfectly well with me, that I was allowed to be kind of have autonomy, which I never had supposed growing up. And a lot of it played into my relationship with my parents, my relationship with God and with religion played into kind of the home I grew up in and all those circumstances. And so feeling I didn't really have a choice to say or to listen, to tune in to how that settled on my heart kind of ties into all those lenses that I had. And so no, it hasn't been super smooth. It's been a lot of dissonance and kind of sitting with that. But the end result has been so expansive and beautiful. And I can hold space for people in different points. I see the value. Some people sit with the black and white and it feels very safe and very comfortable. And so I honor where they are on their path. And I also honor where I am on mine.
That makes a lot of sense. And I had a Buddhist monk on at one point, and people ask him a lot, is Buddhism a religion? Because it falls under it, but it's also very different than a lot of what the Western religions are. And he says it's really the Western concept of religion that's off. We just have this preconceived notion from what we've seen that religion's actually more than what we think it is.
Yes, yeah. I resonate with that. I feel like the roots are there and so much is there. And then it's kind of the way we filter it, or the way the constructs we throw on it, or the cultural things we can throw on it, that can kind of make it less accessible to people and less like penetrating in that heart space.
Exactly. And I admit I'm guilty of this too, is when people say a lot now, I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to say that to avoid confusion. But in reality, I know it's because there's just that, I don't know, kind of like shadow hanging over religion that I don't want to be associated with. Even some of the concepts I deal with could, in theory, be under a broader definition of religion. It's just so frowned upon here now, that where spirituality, thankfully, is gaining traction, becoming more accessible.
Yeah.
So that's how oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there is I mean, like, everything has a shadow side. And so I think it's safe to say that there is a shadow side in religion, and I think being able to recognize that, but then not everyone around me kind of sees that same thing in the religious space. And so it's kind of treading new path and being willing to feel belonging within myself, and realizing like trusting my connection with God and with the divine, and moving forward in that it's become a place to really own and be sovereign. It's become a place to own myself. So that's been really important, I think, as a part of my healing path.
That's a great way to look at it. And now that you mentioned it, now some of the shadow side of spirituality is kind of being brought to light. So there is. So I'm like, how do I have to phrase this in a year or two from now? Because there are definitely some of the wrong types of people that are attracted to it. But like you said, it's still beneficial. And that's what I don't want it to detract from. Yeah, there's BS and scams, but there's also a benefit I wasn't getting from anything or anywhere else. And that's what I hope other people can get from it. And that's the message I want to get out there too, because I tried pretty much anything else, both for like some physical pain and mental stuff I was going through. And this provided me relief. It gave me some purpose, some meaning in my life, and put me on the correct path for once in my life. And that's what I think people can get from this, but they should also be careful.
Absolutely. And I think I grew up in a space where I felt like there was one right way. That's kind of what, was taught. There's one right way to move through life. And that's just been blown open. I feel like the more I connect, I do kind of feel that expansion with God. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. It's as different as there are human beings on the planet. There's different paths to the divine. And so just honoring everyone's individual path and knowing God's got this. I don't. It's been a really, not always pleasant, but it's been a really, really great and interesting shift for my my personal healing path. So,
and God has been something for me that's had a stigma in the past.
Oh yeah, you can say Jesus, God. I feel like all of those different things can be used for weaponized and used in not great ways, and it can also be used in really transformative ways.
Crazy how there can be a good side or bad side of pretty much anything.
Yeah,
you can basically twist something with the purest intentions and use it for some ill-gotten gains or just for your own personal selfish reasons. Yeah. So I think it's the intention behind it more so than what it is.
Yeah. So just kind of realizing that healing was going to look different for me. You introduced that, I am a survivor of sexual abuse, and healing for me, I really thought that it was going to be like, I don't know, like this kickback, like spa day. I was going to be able to like heal, rest, recover, and that I was going to be able to like check a box. Like I said, I kind of grew up in that world of like box checking. I had a day planner growing up, and I loved like, okay, here's what I have to do today, and I check everything off. It it was so satisfying. But realizing that the path of healing is not a box I can check. It's really more a state of being where I have compassion for myself, where I have grace for myself, where I can hold space for the emotions that do arise, and I can validate those emotions, and I can say, hey, you're sitting with this pain right now. I'm proud of you for sitting there. Some reparenting, some compassion, and I can move forward through that space of compassion. And that picture is what healing looks like, more than I'd say myself 10 years ago, where I literally thought I was going to land at a destination. And it's really more about the state of being.
Some of the alternative healers that I went to towards the beginning of my healing journey, they said, this healing journey is a lifelong path.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of thought, oh no, not me. I'm going to do this, get in and get out. I'm going to do what I have
Ambitious.
to. Yeah. But now I see there is truth in what they said. I did deal with this really big stuff in my life early on, because that was stuff I had to get over and get through. It was just an obstacle. But now, as I'm further along, I realize I can always improve myself. There's always something to work on. And I took a comprehensive approach. I just had to heal from every angle because I had such unhealthy influences. There's always more knowledge you can learn. And the way I see it's improving my life, and now I'm able to share this knowledge with others. It's kind of driving me to just keep learning more and keep trying more myself.
Yeah. When you're in those dark spaces, I remember hearing like, oh, you'll be able to help people with this one day. Like sometimes it's like, it like hits you hard. Like, I don't want to hear that right now, that you can use it for good. But honestly, that's what I've seen with my own path, is that, these dark spaces, these hard spaces, that honestly, some of the paths I've walked, I'm like, I wouldn't wish this on the worst person on the planet. But what they've done is they've deepened me and they've transformed me, and they've been able to help me hold space for other people. I don't necessarily have to go through all the things that everyone else has gone through. My ability to feel empathy, and that by sitting in those places that you have to sit through when you're in the healing space, my compassion is just expanded, and I think my gifts and my ability to help support other people has kind of bloomed from all that.
Do you think there's such a thing as the reluctant healer who starts on this journey just...
Oh, yeah.
I kind of fit in that too, I think, now that you mention it. And that's what's kind of funny for me, because I was like that type. I wasn't going to do this. And people tell you that when you're starting is, oh, you could share the story with others and they'll relate to you more, which is true now looking back on it.
Totally.
But at the time, I just wanted to heal myself. It wasn't how it would relate to others. I didn't really want to become a healer. And I definitely did see myself being able to do that, being able to help others. So that was the last thing on my mind, which was a contrast, because some people in classes, they're like level 1. They just want to start their whole business right away.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I see sometimes they're the ones who don't. It's like the reluctant ones that end up having the more long-term success from what I've seen.
Yeah. I just wanted to feel better. I was like, I just don't want to feel this hard stuff. I want to process it. And also too, I think the wisdom of, through the years is that I've gained is like that pit. You feel like, oh man, if I could just get out of this, right now, that pit, that dark space, that hard space, that is where we're transformed. That is where we're changed. I remember just thinking like, how fast can I move? How quick can I get through this? And it was sitting in those spaces that I became a more refined version, or closer to like a true version of myself.
What was the impetus that finally drove you to seek healing? Was it delayed for a while, or did you was it discouraged in your family and upbringing?
I feel like my mom, her mom, there was a lot of generations that were into kind of holistic health, wellness. That was always like a vein that was very like strong. The healing, I think it was always open to it. It was just we didn't have the resources. So we grew up just without. We were without. all the time. And so it was this major kind of scarcity mindset. So I think I was in college when I very first went to like cognitive behavioral therapy or typical therapy. It definitely had its place. I was in cognitive behavioral therapy for probably 12 years. And I was able to sort through, codependency issues. I was able to notice, different patterns that I had, different things like that. I felt like, my family, everyone around me, held space for that. But I realized that there were some places that I was definitely stuck where I wanted to break through, but then I kept kind of going into these patterns of feeling unworthy or feeling like I wasn't enough or feeling like there was something wrong with me. And it wasn't until I had a therapist actually, and she recommended that I try a modality called the emotion code. And so I went to a practitioner, and it wasn't her full-time job. She actually had 2 adopted kids, and she had learned this modality to support them. And she was a music teacher and all these different things. She had all these different things. And so I show up as like at her house, and we had a session in her basement where she taught music lessons. And I remember being just like, well, at this point, I'm really open to whatever. I'm hurting pretty badly right now. My wounds were active. And so I started seeing her regularly for emotion code sessions. And are you familiar with emotion code?
I haven't tried it as you have. And
okay.
I know, because I've listened to your podcast episode about it. So I do know. But for someone who's new to it, if you could give the general gist of what it entails.
Yes. Okay. So emotion code it's really interesting. I kind of went in with just this open mind, like, all right, what, if it's going to help, I'll try whatever. And so basically the idea behind it is that we are energy. And so we have an energy, our whole being is in like an energy field, and we can trap different emotions. So when we go through trauma or hardships or wounds or even something that's really overwhelming or we process things, childhood to this point in our life, and our energy field's almost like a garden, and we have wonderful things we plant, joy, peace, connection, but then we can have things in our resonance that get stuck. Vulnerability, anger, these different emotions. And so I like this modality so much that I trained in it. So now I'm a practitioner, which has been super full circle, really awesome. But what it did was when I was working with my practitioner is it cleared out a space where I was feeling just worthlessness and self-hate. And it was like it almost like if I was like a garden, it was like it weeded those things out of my energy field. And then it gave me the chance. I had to use my will to plant something new, but it gave me like a fighting chance to plant worthiness and to plant self-love. And so it extracted those things, but then I had to use my will to try to put something new in that space that was positive. And so, that was really, I think, one of the most pivotal points on my healing journey, because once I had self-love, once I had that care for myself, and I realized that was actually valuable, I was able to set boundaries. I was able to love people better. I was able to break codependent habits because I realized love wasn't me throwing myself under the bus for someone else. That love was me showing up for people in a capacity that was authentic, and that I could still care for myself and love myself.
That was a great realization. And thanks for sharing that. It's interesting how you can replace those old patterns and habits, which are deeply ingrained in our subconscious.
Yeah.
And if you had a narcissistic parent or parents like I had, they could groom you or train you to put their needs first.
Absolutely.
The kid generally has to grow up fast and be the adult and take care of their needs. It's a really unfortunate situation. And that's what can cause that people-pleasing attitude.
You're explaining my childhood, Johnny. This is my childhood.
A bit of mine as well.
My father was a narcissist. He was also my abuser. And so a lot of those beliefs that came, love is putting someone else's needs above yours. Love is not having needs at all. Those were the messages. And I was very much conditioned to be that parent figure to my parents. I was conditioned to show up for them in a certain way, to feel, and that cycle, when I was in that cycle, I mean, I felt important. I felt like I was like, oh, I'm helping my parents. I'm being so giving, and they made me feel like it was my father especially made me feel like it was like this, like, oh, you're my counselor. I'm like, what business did I as a child being a counselor to a grown up, like it was very backwards. It was very twisted, and it infiltrated a lot of the ways that I felt about myself. And so, I mean, emotion code was just a huge tool for me to let go of some of those subconscious things. So while cognitive behavioral CBT is great for working with the conscious mind, realizing how much of our wounds and trauma and everything it's all in our subconscious. And so that was so pivotal for me because it unlocked this ability for me to create a new narrative with myself.
Cognitive therapy definitely does have benefits, but I also hit a wall. Mm-hmm. And there are good therapists and bad therapists out there.
Totally.
Too. So people get discouraged. I recommend that they might try a different one as well, because I tried it and I was wondering, why isn't this working? And it just kind of made me feel more self-conscious and guilty and get more depressed because I thought there was even something more wrong with me. So that was the danger for therapy for me. While it is definitely vital and a good tool, and I've tried EMDR, which is, that people are familiar with, it's kind of like a rapid eye movement where it could help release trauma, which is a nice technique. And good therapists can give you good book recommendations and things like that. But as one therapist told me, who I did shadow work with at this one's men's retreat, he said a lot of the therapy is cognitive based and designed to go on forever. So that's why it's important to find a therapist that resonates with you as well. But some people in the spiritual healing field want to skip therapy altogether, and I don't think that's a good thing either. Someone once told me there's a lot of people in this field who seek spirituality that could use therapy. And oddly enough, there's a lot of people in therapy who could use spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. I think they definitely go hand in hand. I learned so much from it, but definitely there was same as you, there was a wall that I hit. And just to validate that point, like if you're not clicking with your therapist, or I had kind of an issue with authority. I whenever I was at parent teacher conferences, doctor's appointments, therapy, I was like, this is the authoritative figure. And so I kind of put myself and my intuition in the backseat, sort of like a replay of my childhood. And so when I realized, like, no, I want to vibe with my therapist the same way that you want to connect with whoever you're doing healing work with on a level where you have that rapport and you have that connection. And if it's not there, as hard as it is, I do encourage to keep, like any listener, to keep looking. You'll find that connection. You'll find that person that's the right person to integrate that healing.
And now that you're on the alternative healing path, did you do anything after the emotion code?
So emotion code was pretty big. And then I guess this kind of leads to where a few years later where we crossed paths. I started, okay, let's rewind a little bit.
Because you are an energy healer too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got certified in mindfulness and meditation coaching. And then I also am certified as a Reiki master. And so I felt drawn to these modalities, and like, I don't know what exactly I'm going to do with them, but it was just this craving to learn. And so I learned them and I certified. And then I sort of ended up certifying in emotion code right around the same time that I did my first session of combo with you.
How did you hear about combo, and how was that experience like for you, your first time?
Yeah. So my good friend that I went to high school with, she lives in Utah, and she started a combo practice. So she learned to become a practitioner and to administer combo. And she was sharing all kinds of things on social media. And I was learning all these facts about it. And I was like, wow, this sounds incredible. It's kind of like a mind, body, like all systems go, this modality or this medicine. And so it got me really curious. And, as my intuition has grown stronger over the years, I knew it was a yes for me. I was like, this is a yes. But I couldn't get to Utah. And so I did an internet search for combo practitioners. And that's how I found you.
Very spiritual, the good old internet search. So.
Right. But I checked out your Instagram. I looked at a couple different things and I was like, all right, is this a good match? And I always move kind of through that intuitive space because this was different than combo was different than anything I'd ever done before. And so I wanted to make sure that it was the right time and practitioner. And so, it all aligned. It worked out.
I'm glad you said that because there was an interesting takeaway. The stuff I put out there isn't always for the mainstream, and I'm sure I lose a lot of people. I should say that's a dilemma as well, because obviously these alternative healing modalities can have a lot of benefit, and I do want them to reach the people they can help. But at the same time, it reaches the ones that'll resonate with me as well.
Right.
And maybe I can't help those other people who wouldn't resonate with my message or the way I do things. So it is a good lesson in how I attract the right people for me, because I do strongly believe in that. I use that term. We're not Burger King. We're not just meant to grow for growth's sake. And it's like, that can go wrong on so many ways. And it's not what I'm about either. It's not why I got into this. I'm glad you shared that with me both before and now, because it was a good reminder that what I'm doing is the way I wanted to do things, and it is attracting the right people and the tribe, I guess. The ones that'll stay with me, even not because I try to get people in and out as fast as possible. I like to empower people, as you know, let them take charge of their own healing journey. But it's still nice to see their growth over time.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Especially if they step up and get into the field themselves.
Yeah. So combo, I don't know if you've explained to your listeners before about the lunar cycle where you do 3 combo sessions in a 30-day period.
Technically 28 days, but you could call it a month. It's give or take. And it does go deeper each time, as you saw, and the benefits do generally hold longer. So
there's like these amazing physical benefits, which I felt, and then there's spiritual benefits too. And I joke with my sister because since doing combo, it's like I feel like my third eye is like so open. I like joke with her. I'm like, I need sunglasses for my third eye because sometimes I'm like looking at a situation or watching, like looking at the news, or I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, I'm seeing things in a deeper way. Just even in relationships, I'm like, oh, I'll see someone respond to something very reactive, very whatever. And I'm like, oh, I can feel almost like, yeah, that's an inner child wound. You're functioning from that space. And it's like, it's just almost downloaded. It's like it's there. So I feel like since doing combo, that's been a really neat thing, but also sometimes overwhelming in the world. Yeah, this world definitely isn't designed for highly sensitive people. And that's why it's courageous to desensitize. I was a sensitive kid. They didn't have these terminologies back then or resources. So I had to desensitize. Like that was the only way you could really survive. Yeah. Especially as a guy where I grew up. It wasn't encouraged. There was no one else like me. So I didn't really know what to do. I had no guidance. So it's unfortunate because looking back on it, I feel I did lose a lot of my gifts. But the thing that was remarkable was I realized I could resensitize, which I did slowly but surely. I might not have what I had if I never did that desensitizing process, but you can get them back through medicines and different healing practices and meditations. Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like my empathy and my intuition, and those are some of my gifts, but I had to shut those down during my childhood to survive. I saw red flags every day all the time, but my body had to stop reacting to those things. And so, I honor that what I had to become sort of to get through those spaces. But I do feel like when you reach back for those gifts and for those abilities that you had, or that lived in you. I mean, I grew up thinking I was like a yes man. I grew up thinking I was like a rule following, box checking, like this was who I had, basically the mask I'd put on to get through my life. And I look back now, I mean, my mom has funny stories of me being like, why? All the time, asking questions all the time. And I realize like now that I've done this work and I've been in this, sitting with this and kind of reclaiming these parts of myself, I'm like, oh, that's who I am. That's what I ask questions, and I'm a seeker, and I'm a healer, and I became this other role really to get through what I needed to get through. And I honor that. I think there's sometimes, we demonize the ego, or we would demonize, those parts of ourselves. But I see that as like, that was full survival mode, and I did the best I could. And so I honor that part of myself. And when that part bubbles up, I'm like, hey, I see you. You got me through some really hard stuff, but you don't need to show up anymore, or I can be in a more authentic space.
And that's why it's good we're being easier on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We learn to be more compassionate with ourselves as we were towards others. And that's a important realization, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned something earlier, how we had to go through these horrible experiences. If people subscribe to the starseed theory, we're kind of in the indigo child generation,
Mm-hmm, yeah.
where we had to go through trauma after trauma.
Mm-hmm.
These situations where, looking back on it, it's like, how do we even get through that? How do we survive?
So true.
But you mentioned like this next generation, and you are a mom, as
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned on your podcast. They refer to them as either crystal or rainbow children,
Mm-hmm.
and that are kind of born awake, and they don't have to go through these experiences to have that awakening process that we did.
Oh yeah.
So you've noticed that with your kids, right?
Absolutely. My children have been, I mean, it's been a gauntlet of learning. I was an oldest child of 7 kids, and I remember thinking like, motherhood, I got this. I've changed diapers. I've done this. I can do this. I'm responsible. I mean, I was parentified, so I had to be responsible. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be smooth. And it was like a bucket of ice water on my head. It was lesson after lesson after lesson. And then these souls that I'm raising, they are teaching me so much. So much of my transformation and becoming who I am has to do with my motherhood and with these souls that have been placed on my path. They are exceptional, and they see things so clearly and so differently, and it can make it hard, like you said, with sensitive children. When you're a sensitive child or a sensitive soul, it can be jarring being in the world or being alive. It's hard. And so with my kids, I've kind of let go of the idea that I'm here to spare them from any injury or hardship or challenge, and kind of embrace the idea of, I'm going to teach them how to be their own strength. I'm going to be this sounding board that will help them rely on their intuition, to trust themselves, to connect with the divine, to feel free and to feel safe in this world, and just help cultivate that with them, because there are some really special souls.
It's great you're able to nurture that, because what a difference an awake parent can make. If you don't have that conscious parent, they're not going to be receptive to the child who has those gifts or inclinations, and they'll try to like stomp that out of you, which happened in my case.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not aware of these things, I can understand it now, because the world's a rough place, can be cruel. So in their mind, they're probably, they are doing the best they can. Every
generation, I feel like they get tools a little more, and what I really do feel is that for me on my path, I feel like I was definitely a chain breaker in my generation. I see my predecessors, the generations behind me, and then my posterity. I see this pivotal role that I'm playing to step into healing, as uncomfortable as it is. It's kind of unlocking this new generation. It's helping support, and it's shifting. It's shifting a lot. we also have tools now, I feel like that, the generations of the past didn't really have, which is really cool.
This is a hard time though, because just think of what you said, how not only do we have to do the healing on ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but now you have to pass on to the next generation as well. And the society.
No pressure.
Yeah. Even though the collective consciousness has been rising, thankfully, faster than it ever has, but still slower than I'd like, it's still not a conducive environment for conscious parenting. So it's still another battle that you have to face. You still have to do the work on yourself and then with others. It's a hard path. That's why, even though we're sensitive, you really have to be courageous to do this and to step away and say, I'm going to break this cycle of generational trauma. Because, like you said, the predecessors before that, they just copied the patterns of their parents and their parents. So it just kept going. So for someone to step away and say, no, this is where it ends, I'm not going to do this, it's really hard, especially when that's all you know. And you also mentioned your friend who had made the posts about that, and it brought back a funny memory, because it's like that first post you see when I was on social media, a lot of it was just sports posts or just stupid stuff, and then you like see that one post you're not supposed to see, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, makes sense, this is how I think. And then that kind of leads from one thing to another, so it kept going. And that's how I had my kind of awakening in the physical world. So it just reminded me that even though there was the funny part, there also is a benefit of posting what you know and not censoring your message all the time. And that's why it sucks at first, because you'll lose people, but on the other side, it's nice to be your authentic self too.
You'll find your community.
And if you know you have good intentions and you're not mean to hurt anyone, you really want to help, you don't have to feel guilty about doing that either. And I've been stepping more and more into that as well.
I love that. That's good advice going forward, because I'm a new podcaster.
You are?
Yeah.
What inspired you to do your podcast?
So honestly, it's been like a passion project with the divine. I feel like I've been really called to step into this space. I remember years ago where telling any part of my story would have just caused me to just break out in hives or sweat, like just be so nervous. But I have come to really own the parts of my story that have made me me. And I've decided to share bits of that and different things through this podcast that I've started. It's called Speak. And it's mainly sharing stories. And I'll eventually have guests on it. Right now, the first season's kind of more just like my stories and getting to know me. And eventually I want to give space to people that are in this path, on this path of healing, and that are maybe survivors of deep wounds or trauma, and to hold space for that. I think a lot of times with trauma, especially sexual abuse, you kind of see the end version of the person tied up, nice, neat. They're better now, and what I really want to do is create a space for that pit space we were talking about, where you're like in the depths, and just validate and say, not to dwell in negativity, not to dwell in the pain, not to dwell in the hurt, but to help people that are in the middle of it kind of walk through it. So I haven't really stepped into that just yet on the podcast, but I'm kind of like laying the groundwork of my story and the segments that will kind of deal with that, kind of sitting in those hard spaces. I've written a lot. I have poetry. I have all these different things to kind of connect and process some of those harder things, and to give that gift of sitting with someone else in that space is part of what I feel called to do.
I really like the podcast. I think you split up really nicely, whether it's different healing modalities or different parts of your story from past to present. What made you comfortable enough to speak on what you went through? Did it happen overnight? Was it a major change, like an epiphany, or was it a gradual process?
It was definitely gradual. I had outlets for kind of like expressing and processing and different things. And it just kind of came to the point where I lost the fear. I lost the shame. of being a survivor. It wasn't something that I wore as like this sad thing. I remember thinking if people knew what happened to me, they would feel so sorry for me, or they'd view me with a different lens, or they would look at me this way with pity or with, and I really let a lot of those constructs and narratives go. I realized that I love who I am, and I've created this version of myself through these hardships. Not that we have to, because I really want survivors to know that, like, you didn't have to go through this to become the best version of yourself. But as human beings, I believe we are created to transform and rise from the hardships that we experience, that we're built for that. And so, no, I don't think, I needed that to become the best version of myself. But because of my connection with God and the divine, I feel like that transformation power is in everything we experience in the negative. Every hard thing, every wound that we experience has an equal opportunity for a gift for us to grow, to become closer to our higher selves, and to bless the people around us.
That was a great way of putting it, because it's like we talked about, you don't have to have these traumas to awaken or to transform. You could start out as a good person, as we mentioned, this generation, this next generation is. But at the same time, these things happen to us or you, who's ever watching or listening, and that's okay. And what I've learned is you really can get through anything. You don't have to be defined about what happened to you. That isn't your fault, but taking charge of it is.
Yeah.
It's a hard concept to embrace at first, but once you get past that point, it's empowering too, to know that you went through it, survived, and were able to turn it around.
Yeah. It probably was linked up, thinking of like a point in time, it probably was linked up when I was able to kind of reconnect with self-love and with worthiness, when I felt that was intrinsically mine, no matter what, that I just, by being me, I was enough, full stop. I think that's kind of what helped unlock that path of being able to speak up about being a survivor of sexual abuse.
And why I really vouch for you is because I've noticed there's been, well, I'd say two types of people on this path, more than two, but in one category.
Simplify it.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot more than two types on this path. But one split I notice is some people will start taking healing classes to practice it or teach it that haven't done the healing themselves, or very superficially. You did a lot of healing work yourself. I did too. And I noticed the ones that do fare a lot better. I found personally, I come from a place of integrity when I've done that, and I'm still doing that. So I'm not just telling people what to do. I could actually speak from experience. And if there is something better out there, I can adapt. I can learn that and incorporate. I always want to be offering the best modalities. And sometimes different things work better for others, or specific scenarios or situations that people have gone through or going through. So that's what I give you credit for, because I know you've definitely done it and are continuing to do it. And I really respect you for that. And as you found me through stuff that I was putting out there, if someone wants to check out more of what you're about, where can they find your podcast?
So my podcast is on I have an editor, and she does all the tricky stuff of editing it and then putting it on all the platforms. So it's on every platform. It's called Speak. And I'm also on Instagram, Sophia Fogt _speak.
And if someone resonates with your message during this or after checking that out, how do you recommend they approach you, or where can they find you or reach out to you?
Probably on Instagram. Send me a message through Instagram. I can get it that way. Working on website, working on some other things, but that's probably the best way right now.
And last question for that. Do you recommend they do like an intake call so you can feel each other out, or do you recommend starting with a session, or does it even depend on the situation?
For Emotion Code, yeah, I would probably do an intake, and then we could schedule a session. So that's really a great thing about Emotion Code is it can be Zoom, it can be remote, or in person. So there's a lot of great options.
That was a great share. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed your story, watching it grow and putting your message and gifts out there.
Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite things, just jiving, talking about the stuff that matters. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you got to check out Sophia's story today. Please like, follow, and subscribe so you can be notified when the next episode comes out. We have a Patreon. Any amount you donate is greatly appreciated. Thank you for tuning in today. Be seeing you.
You've been listening to the Dystopian Renaissance. Spirituality, healing, consciousness, truth. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show. And tell a friend or two. That would help also. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at the Dystopian Renaissance. And please find the website at www.thedystopianrenaissance.com.